She doesn't even work here anymore, my brother's wife said, loud enough for the entire conference room to hear. Why is she sitting at that table? I didn't answer. I set my coffee down, folded my hands on the folder in front of me, and looked at the clock on the wall. 8:54, 6 minutes early. My brother Caleb leaned back in his chair and smiled at me the way he always did when he thought he'd already won. It was a slow, patient smile, the kind you give to someone you pity. His wife Simone had her phone out, probably texting their attorney updates in real time. My mother was sitting in the corner in a gray blazer she'd bought for the occasion, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. Nobody had spoken to me directly since I walked in. That was fine. I hadn't come to talk. The door opened at exactly 9 o'clock. She walked in without knocking, which told me everything about how she operated. She was 60, maybe 62, wearing a navy blazer over a white blouse, reading glasses pushed up on her head like a headband. She carried a leather portfolio and a phone, nothing else. No theatrical briefcase. No rolling cart of documents. She sat down across from Caleb's attorney, opened the portfolio to a clean page, and clicked her pen. "I'm Helen Marsh," she said. "I represent the estate of Douglas Harwell and the interests of his named trustee." Caleb's attorney stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. "We have not been notified of any trustee. This is a family mediation, not a trust proceeding." Helen didn't look up from her notes. It stopped being a family mediation when your clients filed a petition to contest the will and remove the executor. "Sit down." He sat. Across the table, Simone's smile flickered. Just for a second. Then she reached over and put her hand on Caleb's arm, whispering something in his ear. He nodded slowly. But I noticed his jaw had tightened. My mother looked at me from the corner. Her expression was the one she used when she needed something, that particular mixture of accusation and expectation, like I was already failing her somehow by just being present. She wanted me to be scared. She had spent 20 years planting seeds of doubt in me, so that by now the fear was supposed to be automatic. It wasn't. I knew what was in Helen's portfolio. I had been in the room when Dad signed it. The petition Caleb filed said 3 things. First, that our father had been mentally incompetent when he amended his trust 14 months ago. Second, that I had exercised undue influence over a vulnerable elderly man. Third, that the estate should be frozen pending an investigation. He had filed it 11 days after the funeral. The ink on the death certificate was barely dry. Dad had spent the last 4 years of his life in the house where Caleb and I grew up, in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. After Mom left for the condo in Scottsdale, after Caleb moved to Portland with Simone and their new life that didn't have much room for aging parents, someone had to stay. Someone had to manage the prescriptions and the doctor's appointments and the groceries and the calls from Medicare and the plumber and the guy who mowed the lawn and forgot to come back. I was 31. I had a remote job in project management that I could do from anywhere, so I stayed. I didn't stay because I was told to. I didn't stay out of guilt, though they'd tried that angle. I stayed because he was my father and he was alone, and that seemed like enough of a reason. Caleb called on birthdays, sometimes. He visited twice in 4 years. Once for Christmas when he and Simone were already driving through Ohio to see her family anyway. Once for 4 days in the spring, 2 years before Dad died, when he decided he wanted to reconnect. He took Dad to a baseball game and posted the photos. Got 300 likes. I was there every day. I didn't post anything. "Miss Harwell," Helen said, and I realized she was talking to me. She slid a document across the table. "Can you confirm that this is the trust amendment your father executed on March 7th of last year?" I looked at it. "Yes." "And were you present when he signed it?" "I drove him to the bank. I waited in the lobby." Caleb's attorney cut in. "She waited in the lobby, meaning she was present, meaning she had opportunity to exert pressure." Helen looked at him the way you look at a student who has given the wrong answer in class, but confidently. Waiting in the lobby of a bank branch while your father meets privately with a trust officer is not exerting pressure. But thank you for flagging the logic. She turned back to her portfolio and pulled out a tabbed document, maybe 40 pages, and placed it in the center of the table. Exhibit A, she said, a certified copy of the amended trust. Counsels. You'll note Article 11, subsection D, the no contest provision. I watched Caleb's attorney lean forward and read. His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind his eyes went very still. The no contest clause was standard language, the kind estate attorneys draft into documents specifically for situations like this one. Any beneficiary who challenges the validity of the trust or who contests the grantor's competency forfeits their interest in the estate as if they had never been named. By filing the petition, Caleb had already pulled the pin. He just didn't know it yet. Helen gave him a moment to finish reading. Then she said, very quietly, "Your clients were notified of this provision in the disclosure letter sent to all beneficiaries following the grantor's death. That letter was delivered via certified mail on October 19th. Signed for by Simone." The room went very quiet. Simone turned to look at Caleb. He was staring at the document. His jaw was working slightly, like he was trying to chew through something he couldn't quite swallow. My mother set down her coffee cup. Outside, a car alarm went off somewhere in the parking lot, then stopped. I want to tell you about the summer I was 23, because that's where this really starts. Dad had just retired from 26 years at an insurance brokerage. He and my mother were supposed to travel. They had talked about Portugal for 15 years, had a folder of magazine clippings about the Algarve coast and small restaurants in Lisbon where you could eat well for $30. That folder sat in the kitchen drawer for a long time. That summer, Mom told him she wanted a separation. It was not a bad marriage exactly. It was a tired one. She wanted Scottsdale and tennis and a life that felt like something she had chosen for herself instead of fallen into at 24. I don't entirely blame her, but what she did next was harder to understand. She left him with the house, the bills, and the early signs of Parkinson's that no one had named yet, but everyone could see. I was the only one who came home. Caleb was busy. He had just launched a small e-commerce business with Simone's brother, and there was always a reason he couldn't get away. The business eventually failed, but by then, there were other reasons. I took a job I could do remotely and moved back into my childhood bedroom. I spent the next 4 years learning the difference between a neurologist and a movement disorder specialist, learning which pharmacy would accept which version of his Medicare supplement, learning how to have a conversation with my father on a bad tremor day when he couldn't get words out fast enough and got frustrated and went silent. He was funny even then. He made jokes I wasn't always ready for. He used to leave sticky notes on the refrigerator that said things like "still here" and "feed me." I still have one of them. The petition said I had isolated him, that I had kept family away and cultivated a position of dependency so I could manipulate his estate decisions. Caleb's attorney said it plainly sitting there in that conference room. Our position is that Ms. Harwell systematically excluded the decedent's other family members from meaningful contact, creating an environment of undue influence. She was his primary caregiver, his financial manager, and effectively his gatekeeper. That level of control over a vulnerable person is textbook coercion. He was good, I'll give him that. The language was careful, clinical, and devastating if you didn't have an answer. I didn't say anything. I looked at Helen. She reached into the portfolio and placed another document on the table, then another, then a third. Exhibit B, she said. The decedent's personal calendar, maintained in a shared Google account to which Miss Harwell had read-only access. The decedent updated it himself until approximately 4 months before his death. I've highlighted the relevant entries. She clicked a small remote, and a projected image appeared on the wall. The calendar. Color-coded. Dad's handwriting in the notes column, scanned and enlarged. March 21st. Called Caleb, went to voicemail. Left message about Thanksgiving. Notation in red. No call back. April 14th. Simone's birthday. Sent card and Visa gift card, $100. Notation. No acknowledgement. June 19th. Father's Day. Waited for Caleb to call. He texted at 9 p.m. Happy FD, Dad. Crazy busy. July 4th. Invited Caleb and Simone for the holiday. Said they had plans. October 9th. His birthday. Caleb sent flowers. Card said, thinking of you. Did not visit. Has not visited in 14 months. Helen advanced the slide. More entries. Page after page of small, precise documentation from a man who still believed, even toward the end, that if he just kept the record accurately enough, the love would eventually show up in the data. Caleb's attorney said, "This is a private document. Its admissibility is established under the state of mind exception," Helen said. The decedent maintained this calendar voluntarily, contemporaneously, with no indication of third-party input. It goes to pattern of contact, which is directly relevant to the isolation claim. Shall I continue? She continued. The entry that broke something open in that room was from the previous November. Caleb and Simone had visited. A real visit. 3 days. The kind Caleb would later describe to anyone who asked as evidence that he was a devoted son. Dad had written about it in the calendar notes. Caleb here with Simone. Nice to have company. Caleb asked about the house 3 times. Whether I had a will. Whether the accounts were set up properly. Did not ask about my medications or the new PT schedule. Left Sunday morning before I woke up. Simone looked at the projection for a long moment. Then she looked at her lap. Caleb said, That's not inaccurate." "It's in his handwriting," Helen said, "not hers." "My brother then did what people do when the evidence has cornered them, but they're not ready to concede. He escalated. He stood up, not fully, just enough to lean forward with his hands on the table. And he said, 'She took advantage of a sick old man who didn't know what he was signing. He had bad days. He got confused. She put a pen in his hand at the right moment, and he trusted her, and she used that.'" His voice cracked a little on the last sentence. "It was a good performance." My mother nodded. I kept my face still. Helen opened a second folder, Exhibit C, an affidavit of testamentary capacity executed by 2 board-certified neuropsychologists dated February 22nd of last year. That is 13 days before the trust amendment was signed. She passed copies around the table. Both evaluators conducted independent sessions with the decedent. Both found him oriented to person, place, time, and situation. Both found him capable of understanding the nature of his assets, the identity of his family members, and the consequences of his estate decisions. The sessions were recorded. Caleb's attorney was very still now, reading. Helen continued. "In the video recording, which has been submitted to the court as Exhibit D, the decedent states clearly and without prompting that he is amending his trust to reflect, quote, what actually happened, not what people assumed would happen. He names each family member. He explains his reasoning. He demonstrates full understanding of the financial values involved." "Those evaluations cost money," Caleb said. He was looking at me now, not at Helen. "Who paid for them?" I held his gaze. He did. He didn't have. "He had a brokerage account you didn't know about," I said. "He opened it 11 years ago. He managed it himself. He used it to pay for the evaluations. The canceled checks are in Exhibit E." The silence that followed had a different texture than the earlier ones. It was denser. Caleb sat back down. "The position your clients have taken," Helen said, her voice entirely neutral, "is that the decedent was incompetent at the time of signing. The court now has video evidence, expert testimony, and contemporaneous financial records demonstrating otherwise. That means the competency claim, the basis of the entire petition, is contradicted by the evidence your clients had access to before filing. The court will have questions about that." Caleb's attorney said, very quietly to no one in particular, "We'd like to request a short recess." You can request one, Helen said, but the no contest clause was triggered at filing. A recess doesn't change that. I want to tell you about the last conversation I had with my father. That was a real conversation, not the kind where I was listening for distress or managing a symptom. It was about 3 weeks before he died. He was having a good afternoon. We were sitting on the back porch, and the neighbor's dog was wandering along the fence line the way it always did, and he was watching it with the focused appreciation he had started to apply to small things. He said, "You know what I realized?" I said, "What?" He said, "I spent 40 years worrying about what I was leaving behind. The house, the money, the stuff. And you know what none of it means? Any of it. Unless the person holding it knows what you meant." I didn't say anything. I just waited. He said, "You know what I meant. That's the whole thing. That's it." He pointed at the dog, which had stopped and was now sitting in a patch of sun with the specific satisfaction of an animal that has found exactly what it needed. He said, "You're gonna be okay, kiddo." I told him I knew. I don't know if he believed me or if he just needed to say it, but he smiled, and we sat there for another hour, and I didn't try to fill the silence. In the conference room, the recess request was denied. Helen had laid out the case with the patience of someone who had done this many times before and had long since stopped needing the other side to understand quickly. She gave them time to read. She answered questions in the same dry, factual register. The same way you'd read a weather report, not unkind, simply accurate. The mediation ended with a ruling that the no contest clause had been triggered by the petition. Caleb's share, which had been a meaningful portion of the estate, reverted to the trust. The petition was dismissed. Helen requested that attorney's fees be assessed against the petitioners, citing the documentation showing they had received and signed for the disclosure letter containing the no contest language before filing. The mediator agreed to forward the fee request to the court. My mother walked out without speaking to me. She moved through the lobby with the rigid posture of someone refusing to run. Caleb and Simone passed me in the doorway. He stopped. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something. Apologize, explain, anything. His mouth opened. He said, "You could have told me about the trustee, about any of it. You could have just told me." I looked at him for a moment. "I did tell you." He frowned. "When?" "Thanksgiving, 4 years ago. I told you he was thinking about a trust structure and that you should talk to him. You said you'd call him about it. You didn't call him about it. You didn't call him about it. You called him 3 months later to ask if he was planning to sell the house." I stepped around him and walked to the elevator. The lobby had marble floors and a fern in a pot by the door that had seen better days. I stood there waiting for the elevator and looked at the fern and thought that someone really should water that thing. 6 weeks later, Helen called. The estate transfer was complete. The final court order had been entered. Caleb's attorney had filed a motion for reconsideration, which was denied in 11 days. The fee assessment was upheld. Caleb and Simone were responsible for a significant portion of the legal costs, and their own attorney's bill on top of that. I didn't know the exact number. I didn't ask. What I knew was this. The house was mine. The investment accounts were mine. The brokerage account Dad had managed quietly for 11 years, the one no one else knew about, had been doing well. Not spectacularly, but well. He had been careful and patient, and he had not told anyone about it except the trust officer at the bank and eventually me. There was a letter in the trust documents, not a legal letter. A personal one, typed on his old IBM-style keyboard with the slightly crooked lowercase e. The one that always printed a little higher than the other letters. I had not read it in the room with Helen. I read it at home at the kitchen table with the sticky note from the refrigerator sitting next to my coffee. It said, "I know this is going to be complicated and I know you're going to handle it. You always do. I'm not leaving you this stuff because you earned it, though you did. I'm leaving it to you because you're the one who understood that the point was never the stuff. Don't let them make you feel guilty about that. You were here. That was the whole thing. That was everything. The crooked lowercase e appeared in everything. I folded the letter and put it in the same drawer where I used to keep his sticky notes. I deleted my brother's contact from my phone, not in anger. I was past the part where it felt like anger. It was more like the quiet, administrative task of updating a record to reflect what was actually true. He was someone I had grown up with. He was not family in the way that word was supposed to mean. My mother, I kept. Not because things were good between us. They weren't, and probably won't be for a long time. But she had not filed anything. She had sat in that corner with her coffee and she had watched, and whatever she'd hoped to gain by being there, she'd gone home empty-handed without putting her name on a document. That felt like a line worth preserving, even if thinly. I drove home on the interstate with the windows down. It was early October that week of Ohio fall when the air is cold enough to feel like something and the light does that particular thing to the trees, making everything look briefly, accurately, like a painting of itself. Dad used to say October was the only honest month. Everything else in the year is trying to convince you of something, he'd say. October just shows you what it is. I thought about him watching the neighbor's dog in the sun, pointing at it like it had proven a point. He was right. I was going to be okay. I had been the one who was there, and no one, not a petition or a mediator or a brother who called on holidays sometimes, could put that back in the envelope and pretend it hadn't happened. The trust was closed. The record was accurate. And when they came knocking, for the last time, there was nobody left to open the door. I keep thinking about that sticky note still sitting in my kitchen drawer. 2 words in my dad's handwriting still here. He left it on the refrigerator on a bad tremor morning when he couldn't get the words out fast enough and the silence between us had gotten heavy. He didn't explain it. He just stuck it there and shuffled back to the couch. I didn't say anything either. I just read it and made us both coffee. That's the thing nobody tells you about showing up for someone. It doesn't look the way people imagine. It's not dramatic. It's not Instagram-worthy. It's a sticky note and a coffee and sitting quietly on a porch watching a neighbor's dog find a patch of sun. And it's doing that again and again for 4 years, while other people are busy and mean to call and just never quite do. I used to feel guilty about what happened in that conference room. Not because I thought I'd done anything wrong, but because I'd been trained since I was a kid to make myself smaller when my family needed a reason for their own failures. That training runs deep. It doesn't disappear just because you know where it came from. What I've come to understand is that what my father did, keeping that calendar, documenting every missed birthday and unanswered call, scheduling those evaluations 3 months before he signed anything, that wasn't cynicism. That was clarity. He looked at the situation honestly, without sentimentality, and he made decisions based on what was actually true rather than what he wished were true. That kind of clear-eyed honesty is harder than it sounds when the people you love are involved. Most of us spend years protecting feelings instead of facts. He chose facts. And in the end, the facts were the only thing that held. There's something I want to say about Caleb, and I want to say it without anger because I'm past the part where it feels like anger. He is not a villain in the way stories usually need. He's someone who made a series of small choices over many years. To be busy, to be absent, to ask about the house instead of the medications. And then one day those small choices had accumulated into something large and irreversible, and he didn't understand how he'd gotten there. That's the part that should scare all of us. We don't usually make one catastrophic decision. We make 100 ordinary ones, and we tell ourselves each time that we'll make it right later, that later is still available, that there's still time. There wasn't. What saved me wasn't luck, and it wasn't strategy, though Helen was exceptional. What saved me was that I had actually been there. You can't forge presence. You can't backdate showing up. When the calendar came out with Dad's handwriting on every page, there was no document Caleb could produce to counter it, because the truth of what happened was already written down by the only person whose account couldn't be questioned. I think about that when I'm tired and the work feels invisible and no one is watching. The record is still being made. Every day you show up with integrity, every time you resist the easier choice because it's not the right one, every time you keep going when it would be so much simpler not to. All of it gets written down somewhere, even if only in the memory of the people who are paying attention. My dad was paying attention. He always was. The drawer with his sticky notes is in the kitchen, second from the left. I don't open it very often, but I know it's there.